Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. So today is March 22nd, and I was so excited about the guests that I have on my show today that I pretty much sent myself into a full neurological meltdown, probably about an hour before I had the interview with him, because I was just so excited to get to talk to somebody who is an expert about botany and actually teaches a course on forensic botany. Now, if you don't know, I have a degree in forensic criminology. I actually studied to be on a crime scene unit. Now, my specialties were profiling and sex crimes investigation. So I never did any real studies in forensic botany, but I would have loved the opportunity if it had been available at my university. So it is fantastic that he has 2 books available that give information on forensic botany and how it can be applied to fiction writing as well as actual criminal cases. And I just had such a wonderful time talking to him. Now, I want to stress there are probably going to be a few sound glitches in this recording. I tried to clean it up as best as I could, but there were a few places that I got some weird feedback, and I tried to minimize it. So hopefully it won't be too distracting for you, because the information that this man has to share is just fascinating. There is no other word. I was riveted the entire time. So without any more blather, let's just go ahead and bring my guest on in. Please welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, Dr. David J. Gibson. Today, I am so excited that I get to have a sit down with David J. Gibson. And this person probably has more initials after his name than anyone else I know. PhD, FRSB, which for those who don't know, and I will be honest, I had to look it up, Fellow of the Royal Society of Biology. Thank you so much for being with me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure indeed.
Now, how do you prefer to be addressed? Because I know you're also a full professor. So you have doctor, but you also have professor.
Yes, just call me David.
Thank you. The first thing that I did want to do is just kind of briefly go over your education because, wow. And then
I don't know about that, but okay.
Go into a little bit of your research and some of your professional publications, and then talk about your book, The Planting Clues, and the other one that you have that I am not really sure how to pronounce that one word. The
Use of the Cursed Hebanon.
Hebanon. Okay, that was the one that I wasn't too sure about.
All right. Yeah.
You started out at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom, and then you went to Oklahoma. How did you make that transition?
Yes, how indeed. It was literally at the end of my final year of Reading. You know, you go through the milk round, as they call it, looking for jobs and everything, and try to figure out what to do. And a friend of mine had been to Oklahoma and knew a professor there and said, why didn't you write to him about going over there to do a postgraduate degree? So I did, and I ended up there. And of course, I didn't even know where Oklahoma was on the map. And I literally landed in the middle of the United States in Oklahoma with no idea what I was going to do. And that started it.
And you got your BS in botany at Reading, and then you had a master's in Oklahoma. Then you went to Bangor and got your PhD in plant biology, then moved on to Rutgers University for postdoc studies, and then you came back to Kansas State University as an assistant scientist. How did you end up in Kansas?
Well, when I was at Rutgers doing a postdoc, it was a short-term contract. And so I needed to find something a bit more long-term funding. And that was a position working for the long-term ecological research program on the Quonset Prairie that came up. And I applied for it. And I was fortunate enough to get that position. It wasn't as assistant scientist at the time. That was a sort of promotion that came along a bit later. But again, I applied for a position not having been there before, just willing to move and willing to go and see what it was like, and ended up there.
See, now, as a Kansas girl myself, like born and raised, I lived there for 46 years before moving to Europe. Usually one of the first things that I always do is I apologize to people for it being just such flat prairie land, but that was perfect for you.
Well, and it's not so flat. I mean, the Flint Hills is not flat at all.
True.
I mean, people talk about Kansas being one of the flyover states, or one they drive through to get to Colorado, and it looks pretty dreary. It's on the interstate. Mm-hmm. But the Flint Hills is quite rugged. It's quite hilly. If you start walking and hiking over it, you get out of breath, and it's quite beautiful.
It is. But the one thing that we do have a joke about, if you're driving from about Wichita, where I'm from, to Denver, Colorado, it's always a joke about if you can spot the tree somewhere on your drive.
There is a bit of that. Yes, it's true.
Now, after Kansas State University, you went to the University of West Florida.
Right.
What were you doing at that university?
As a postdoc at Kansas State and formerly at Rutgers, you're trying to get a faculty position. Postdocs are kind of a little bit more training after your PhD, a little bit more research under your belt. But ultimately, most postdocs are looking for a faculty position. And so again, when I was at Kansas, I was there for 3 years. After a little while, I started looking around for faculty positions, and that was one that came up, University of West Florida. They're looking for an assistant professor of biology to teach botany courses. And I was fortunate enough to get that position. Again, somewhere I hadn't been before.
And what was the difference in the study that you were doing between, Kansas prairie lands to Western Florida?
Well, the research I did in West Florida was not totally different. I mean, I worked on the sand dunes, which are basically grasslands on the coast. And they are absolutely beautiful systems on the coast. And so I was looking at sand dune restoration projects. And so that was my research there.
And you finally ended up at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, where you have become a full professor.
Yes.
Now, besides just your regular teaching duties, what else do you do as a full professor?
Well, our position is 50% research, 50% teaching. And so, half the time I'm teaching, half the time I've got the opportunity to do research. And so that's what we do. All the faculty have that position. So I'm teaching 2 or 3 courses per academic year. And then the rest of the time I'm working with my graduate students in my lab to do research.
I'm sure some people are probably a little bit surprised by the book that you have just come out with, where it's based on how forensic botany pertains to different fiction genres. But you have written numerous publications, articles for peer-reviewed journals and books, and you have your own series of books based on your research.
Yes.
So now how do you go from being a professor of plant biology and doing all of this academic work to transitioning to the forensic botany in your fiction studies?
Yeah, it's not such a surprising transition, actually, because a few years ago, I was given the opportunity to develop a new course. And so I'd literally been walking through the library stacks, and I came across a couple of forensic botany books just by chance. You just see things on the shelves, and they fascinated me. And, I've had an interest in crime shows on TV and that sort of thing, like many of us do. And I thought, that would be a brilliant course to teach, because I could basically teach a botany course with a real hook to it. And so I developed this course called Forensic Botany, and I was teaching it, and I got good feedback, and students enjoyed taking the class. And I was fascinated by the material, by learning about how plants can be used to solve crimes. And so after a while, I thought, well, let's write a book on the subject. There are some textbooks, but I wanted to write something that would be more available to the interested reader rather than the academic or for students, something that anyone would find of interest. And so I decided to write this book, and here it is.
And that book is Planting Clues: How Plants Solve Crimes.
Right. What
has been the feedback that you've gotten from your peers on this book?
Which peers? You mean academic peers? Everyone's interested in it. I've got good feedback. I mean, it certainly fits within the scope of what I'm supposed to be doing as a professor, because it's a botany book. And just about everyone I've heard from, I've known nothing negative. Everyone is like, well, that's interesting. That's fascinating. And everyone's really interested in it because, my peers have not taken my class. But when they hear about the book and they learn about what it's about, a lot of them, I don't know how many of them are buying it, but they certainly seem interested in it.
I was just kind of curious as to how many of them would be like, I never thought about that angle. And it actually brought them into looking at this as well.
I think so, yes. I think that's the case. And when I started teaching the course, I got a similar sort of feedback. And then with the book coming out, people realized how relevant botany is in this particular field. Because most people myself included beforehand, had not thought about how what we do as botanists can have this sort of relevance.
Well, and as I was reading through some of your work too, talking about the different authors from the classics like Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I used to read all of that stuff all the time as I was growing up, but it never really dawned on me about the mention of different poisons and things that they were using in the work. It just kind of like went straight over my head. But then after reading through some of your work, it really like makes me want to go back and reread those stories now and look at it from a different point of view with, new information.
Yes, that's right. And of course, those two authors in particular have loads of botanical information, mostly poisons in their stories, which is just fascinating. I mean, Agatha Christie tends to be pretty accurate with her work because she was a trained chemist herself. And so she knew about plant potions and plant poisons. And so she incorporated that into most of her stories. How did the butler do it? How do they kill off someone? And in many cases, they used a plant poison. Arthur Conan Doyle is a little bit different. And in one case, he completely made up a plant that doesn't even exist whatsoever as a poison. But he also had Sherlock Holmes talking about tobacco and how you could tell what cigarette or cigar someone had smoked from the nature of the tobacco, the remains and so forth. So he incorporated botany a little bit in his stories as well.
And that was actually one thing that I was going to ask about too, was whenever someone uses factual information about a poison and how to use it and what it does and how they killed somebody with it versus something that's completely fictional. Do you think that an author has a responsibility to worry about whether or not someone would take that factual information that they are being given in a story and maybe putting it to practical use to do away with somebody? I mean, should that even be something that people consider when giving this kind of information?
Well, yes, probably. And some people have joked that my book is a how-to book on how to kill people. And certainly, if you read Agatha Christie, she mentions all these poisons, like leaves from yew trees and things like that. It's well known that yew tree is poisonous. I don't know if she gives doses, though, and so some things are deadly poisonous at the tiniest amounts, like ricin and things like that. Others, you need quite a bit more. But responsibility, I don't know. I think if someone wants to kill someone, they'll probably find a way.
That's very true. My husband and I were actually having this discussion the other day because my next book that I'm getting ready to do is a crime thriller. And I told him I had an idea that I wanted to put in this book about how to mess up a crime scene so that it couldn't be worked. And I told my husband I didn't know how much detail I should give because I don't want to give somebody the ideas of how to to do this. But at the same time, it's such a great story idea. But I keep going back and forth on just how much reality do I want to put in this or just keep it fictional?
Well, I put it in. I mean, I think that, if your perpetrator is trying to mess up the crime scene, they'll probably do a reasonable job. But can they really mess it up totally if they're good investigators? I mean, Edmond Locard, that I talk about in my book, the French forensic person, said there's always a trace. There's always something. And that no matter what a criminal is going to do, they're going to carry with them from the crime scene some trace evidence. So they may try really hard, but some of the evidence, some of the botanical evidence, there's no way you could really mess it up. I mean, like pollen, you can get pollen in the mud in your shoes. I mean, you could clean your shoes, I suppose, but it could get pollen on the cuffs of your jacket or even caught up in your eyebrows. There's evidence that you probably just can't get rid of. And DNA evidence as well, and things like that, fragments of materials that can track a suspect back to the crime scene.
I have to admit that even though I am trained in forensic criminology, I never did any studies that would pertain to like botanical information in forensic investigation. And I was really surprised that plants do DNA shedding as well. I had no idea.
They have DNA, so they have to.
For some reason, that just never dawned on me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I was making so many notes while I was going through your books. I'm pulling out little sticky notes to start marking things. Just so much information in there that is just incredible. And I had no idea that Edmond Locard was doing these kinds of studies back in 1930s.
Yes, I know. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. That was one thing that was so exciting for me whenever I was getting ready for this, is there's just such a wealth of information in your books.
Yes, thank you. And Edmund Lacard's work, of course, is huge. He wrote an awful lot of work. He's got several books because they're all in French. So
No.
we have to be able to read French to understand it. But he looked at everything. He called it the organic dust, or les poissures organiques in French. And plant material was just part of that organic dust that he looked at for forensic evidence. Animal materials and other particles of sand and materials like that. There's so much that he looked at and was evidence in his cases back in 1930s when they didn't have the technology that we have now.
Yeah, that was one of the things that just really fascinated me because they don't have the machines that can do all of this detection for you. I mean, there's so many things now that you can put in samples and it will do all the separations and I can't even think of the words right now.
Chemical separations and tests and
Yes.
things.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the processes have become so much faster. I know whenever I was doing my degrees back in like 2000, the difference between the time that it takes to get your evidence through the testing to get, what you need as your final result has shortened so much now. I mean, the advances are just incredible. They're happening so fast.
They are. They are. And yet, I doubt that it's as fast as portrayed in CSI and other crime shows.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I wanted to ask you, do you have a difficult time sitting and enjoying a show like some of the CSI shows when you know that the things that they're saying is like, yes, we'll have this result in 20 minutes. And you're like, no, you won't.
Well, yeah, and that's the sort of attitude I take. I just kind of like, okay, fine. I mean, you'd have got there eventually, but maybe not that fast.
Yeah.
And, I've been looking for episodes of these crime shows for botanical information. And when I then review an episode, I'm probably more skeptical than I would have been before, but I still enjoy them.
My husband absolutely hates watching crime movies with me because I'm always sitting there going, you cannot do that. And he's like, it's a movie. Just remind yourself, exactly. It's a movie.
Yes. Crime shows, they're all the same. I mean, TV and movies, they all do things faster than real life. If you think about it. I watched the movie Luther yesterday. There's no botanical evidence in it at all, but just like the speed at which things happen in that movie, that surely that wouldn't have happened. The coincidences, people showing up at the right time to save the hero and that sort of thing. Yeah. It's still enjoyable.
One of the things I was going to ask you too was I know a lot of criminals will actually try and use arson to cover up their crimes. What can you still determine from ash that you might be able to find connections to certain botanicals in that?
Well, it's not as easy as if the material's there in the first place, but if there's charred plant materials, you can certainly identify it from the ash. I mean, if it's broken down to dust, but if you've got some like fragments and not completely burned up or charcoal and things like that, you can identify wood from charcoal quite readily. A lot of things will be destroyed, certainly. So it's harder. But I do talk about a case in the book where there was arson was used to try and cover up a crime, a murder, but there was sufficient botanical evidence left of peat moss at the crime scene that matched peat moss that got caught up on the suspect's clothing, tie him back to the crime scene, despite the fact that he tried to burn the house down after killing a mother and her two children.
I'm always surprised how many criminals actually do try to use arson to destroy all evidence when, in fact, it really doesn't.
Right. I mean, this isn't my area at all, but my understanding is that, and you'll know better than I, that they can determine that it was arson, they can see where the fires were set, they can look at all sorts of signatures from the fire to learn a lot about how that arson was taking place.
Now, basically what they're doing is just giving the investigators a whole new set of information to catch them instead of what was originally there in the crime. They've just got, an arson to investigate now and all of the evidence from the arson. It's really kind of interesting how many people don't think about the fact that there is still evidence there.
I assume that people committing these crimes aren't thinking clearly.
True.
Unless it's really planned out, maybe, but...
One of the things, too, about the fictional characters, like you were talking about with Luther, is it always amazes me how they seem to have one investigator who does everything. They're like the evidence collector. They're the investigator that does the interviews. They go to the lab and do all of these other things. No, there are a team of people.
Yes, and I learned that pretty early on because I visited the local crime lab and spoke to the people in the lab. And, they say, well, we never go to the crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
There's a CSI, crime scene investigator, that collects materials and gets it sent to us, and then we investigate it. We don't even know what the crime is. We don't know much about it. We just identify things, whether it's DNA or bullet casings and things like that. And then we have to maybe go into court to present that. But that's what they do. And then I've spoken to our local crime scene investigator here in Carbondale, and she says that, she's coordinating the collection of evidence and it gets sent off. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Again, she may have to go into court to talk about the collection of it, but it's very separate. And I talk about this in the Juice of the Curse Hypnon book, that in TV shows and movies, as you say, there's someone that does everything, and that's just not how it really works. I suppose they do that for continuity's sake or something.
And I'm sure they're also trying to just keep their character list small. But at the same time, for people who actually have to deal with these kinds of things, you're like, yeah, no.
Yeah.
One of the authors that you had mentioned in your book was Patricia Cornwell, that she had actually gone to the body farm and used that area, that real scientific outdoor laboratory, as a basis for one of her books. And yet she didn't put any botanical information in her book.
No, she didn't. And,
I find that really odd.
Well, body farms, are set up to look at the decomposition of cadavers, mm-hmm. either from bodies that would have been dumped on the ground or buried in clandestine graves. And so that's their research purpose. And there's been virtually no botanical evidence collected associated with those bodies at any of these body farms. They're great experimental opportunities to do so, but that's not how they've been used. And so I think in her book, like you say, there's a setting at the Tennessee body farm. It just wasn't something that probably came across her radar, so to speak, and hasn't been used. Now, we got a body farm, Southern Illinois University, where I am, and the lead investigator, Gretchen Dabbs, of that body farm has started to look at some of the fungi that are growing on bodies dumped on the ground and finding some interesting observations of the timing of fungal development on the skin of cadavers that could be forensically useful in the future. But that's about it, as far as I know, in terms of using human bodies and body farms for botanical evidence.
I think that's really interesting that you happen to mention that, because in the crime thriller that I'm just now starting to do research on, I'd actually been looking into using some kind of a fungi to help the profilers catch the killer. Mm-hmm. And so, that's one of those things where I'm kind of surprised that there isn't more research at body farms into things like that.
Yeah, well, it needs to be done. We did try to get some funding to do a research project at one time, which didn't get funded, unfortunately. But it's an open area of research that someone should step into.
So, well, maybe your book will actually start getting some more people interested in this, and you'll be able to get some funding for that. That would be a fascinating field.
Yeah. Now, these body farms are not experimentally ideal because, they have to take bodies that they get, donations. And so it's not like a regular scientific experiment where you can have replicates and controls and things like that. So you can still get a lot of evidence from that. Now, what they have done with bodies is mostly pig cadavers to look at botanical evidence as surrogates, because, of course, you can work with those in any setup you like. So there is some forensic botanical evidence from pig cadavers that have been buried or dumped on the ground that can be, that can be used as a springboard for looking at some of these body farms.
Now, have you ever been approached to be an expert witness for anything with botanical evidence?
I have not, no.
Is that something that you would like to get into?
Yeah, I would do it. I think... you'd have to think about what sort of evidence it was and what I was asked to do, because, you have to be an expert in the particular sorts of plant materials. Mm-hmm. And so there's some knowledge required, but there's certainly some things I think I could probably help with if asked.
Ever since I graduated with my degree, I always wanted to have a little bit of experience in courtroom settings to actually be able to present evidence in court for something, and just never got the opportunity to do that.
That would scare me to death. Going into court and presenting. I did presentation at law school, and afterwards they deposed me as an expert in a make-up scenario for the law students. And apparently I didn't do very well because I lost my cool when one of the students was questioning me, and I was answering back more aggressively than you're supposed to. And afterwards the teacher said, if this was a real case, you should probably just sit and answer the questions and don't correct the lawyers, So that was a learning experience for me.
But I would think you knew it wasn't a courtroom experience. You knew that they were students, and your reactions was probably more based as a teacher trying to help than
Perhaps
as
so,
an
yes.
expert witness. I
Yeah,
mean, that would
yeah,
just be my assumption.
yeah, maybe.
Now, do you have an opinion about whether it's better for authors to use real poisons, or if it's better actually for fiction to create something that fits their scenario?
I think they can use real poisons. I mean, there's plenty of poisons to choose from. I don't know why they'd need to make something up, really, because there's enough plants and potential poisons that with research, they could probably find one that would fit whatever scenario they're looking for.
I often kind of think that it probably just comes down to whether or not you want to do the research or if you
Yes.
just want to make it easy on yourself and just create what you need to fit your situation. But I would think that there would be just about anything in nature that you can find to fit what you need to do.
Oh, I think so. I mean, you think about what the poison wants to be. I mean, do you want to kill someone quickly or slowly over a period of time? How do you want to take it? How do you want to give it to them? There's lots of different options, but there's plenty of plants to choose from. And many of them are synthetic drugs that are derived from plants that you can give people as poisons that are originally from plants, but now created synthetically as medical pills that you just give them an overdose.
I was really surprised. I bought a book years ago that was a book of poisons for writers that gives you the basic information for using them in your stories.
Mm,
And I was walking through our yard and I'm like, oh, wow, we have this in our yard. We have this in our yard.
I bet you do. Yes.
And it was just amazing. I mean, things like the one that always stuck with me was lily of the valley
Mhm.
because it just grew wild around our house where we lived. And I
Yeah.
could not believe that that was such a toxic plant. I had no idea.
Oh, there's plenty of them, and there's plenty of them probably inside your house as well that could poison you. One of the things that I often notice is foxgloves.
Hmm.
A source of digitalia, heart poison. They grow everywhere. They grow in people's gardens,
Hmm.
and very common and deadly.
What is one of the things that you have studied that you're surprised isn't used in fiction more often? Because it is something that is so common.
Well, I think botanical evidence is used very much. In the Choose to Curse Heaven, I tried really hard to find contemporary authors that have used botanical evidence, and I put in what I could find, and there wasn't much. So that's really my surprise, is that of all the different sorts of forensic evidence that people are familiar with, they're just not familiar enough with the potential of botanical evidence to be important, and that it could be included in fiction a lot more, I think.
And I think the one thing that even really gets overlooked is the idea of what people take away from the scene with them.
Mm-hmm.
That one I think is probably even less thought of by people than like poisons, because poisons are used all the time in fiction. But people
Yes.
don't think about, okay, I walked through this field and now I'm going home and there are now plant seeds in my shoe that are going to connect me with that prairie area where I just was.
Yes. Yes. That's the whole basis of the four-way linkage theory. It's a kind of a foundation for forensics anyway, is that evidence from a crime scene can link to a suspect, to someone that's killed or whatever. Linking these things together using evidence, and botanical evidence is just one of those different types of forms of evidence that can be important. But as you say, so much of the botanical evidence is unseen by perpetrators. They have no clue that they're carrying this stuff with them as they leave a crime scene. And so then the trick is to try and match it up. Some of the most fascinating ones are some of the high profile ones, like the Ted Bundy case, where he had plant material caught up in the undercarriage of his car or the truck that he was using. He had no idea that that was linking back to the crime scene. And then another serial killer called Jamie Saffron, who butchered bodies and then disposed of parts of bodies around the local area. In butchering those bodies, he got plant material onto those body parts from his own garden, common privet. And when they found these body parts, they realized there were plant materials on these body parts, and that linked up back to his home, linking the bodies to the crime scene, which was his home. And it's the unique mix of materials, not just one plant, but two or three different plants that were unique to the things that were planted in his own backyard that linked those bodies to the crime scene. And of course, he would have no clue about that, no idea about that was happening.
That's incredible. That really does not dawn on people as much as you would think it would. I mean, you would kind of think that it would be a little bit more obvious, but it's really not to most people.
No, because people aren't thinking along those lines. I mean, people that go hiking these days are familiar with boot brush stations, which we have at
Hmm.
the trailheads, where you clean off your boots, brush off the boots to try and stop the movement of invasive species from one location to another.
Hmm.
That's the same sort of thing. And so, there's some familiarity with this idea that as we move around, we carry plants with us. And now there are laws that say that people have boats in a lake, and when they pull a boat out of the lake, they have to wash it off to get
Hmm.
the plants off the boat. Otherwise, they may carry the invasive species to another lake. So there's some familiarity among certain groups of people that plants can get moved around, but they're probably not thinking of it in a crime scene sort of point of view.
Every time I think of an invasive species, I just remember going to visit my sister in the South and seeing kudzu everywhere.
Oh yes, that's a bad one.
I'm thankful it has not adapted to colder weather yet. Otherwise, it would just be taking over North America.
Yeah, it's just really south of us in Illinois. So I mean, and it gets into Illinois now and again, but they've been able to keep it out. Yes, it's a more southern plant.
Now is the time that I like to do 5 quick questions.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah. I don't know what these are going to be.
These are just really simple questions. Like you don't even really need to think about them too much. Just go with whatever comes off the top of your head.
Okay.
Number 1, who is your favorite fictional detective?
Oh, fictional. Probably Sherlock Holmes. He's pretty good, and he's got his foibles, but he's an amazing person.
Yeah, I think I have the complete works of Sherlock Holmes. I'm a sucker for Sherlock. Who is someone in the field of forensic botany that you would love to meet and have a sit down with?
There's two forensic botanists that have written biographies. Mark Spencer in Britain, and I've communicated with him a little bit, wrote a book called Murder Most Florid about his experience as a forensic botanist. And then another Welsh lady called Patricia Wiltshire, who similarly is a forensic ecologist. And both of them I talk about in my book. And she also wrote a biography of her experiences as an active forensic ecologist. And her book's called The Nature of Life and Death. So those people would be really interesting to actually meet.
You realize you're just adding to my to be read list.
Yes. Yeah, both of those are fascinating biographies. I recommend them.
Okay, number 3. Have you ever consulted with an author regarding forensic botany for their fiction works? Or do you have any interest in doing that?
I'll be happy to talk to you about how you're going to include forensic botany in your next book. I haven't done that so far.
Question number 4. Do you have any plans to write your own fiction book?
I am writing one. I'm writing a science fiction novel right now. And so it's got no forensic botany in it. But that's nearing completion as a short book that I'll put out as an indie publication. But in the back of my mind is it'd be nice to write a novel that has actually forensic material in it.
Then question 5. What is next for you? You have done so much. You're a published author, you are a professor, you are a fellow. What else can you possibly achieve?
Well, I'm sure there's plenty. I think that my next kind of move is I'm going to be retiring in the next year or so. And so I want to write more. I want to write some novels. That's what I'd like to do.
I think
Stay
that'd be
tuned.
fascinating.
It's hard. It's a different way of thinking, and I'm not used to it. I mean, this little novel that I'm trying to write is very difficult for me. And writing this book that we've been talking about was very difficult for me because I had to write in a different style than the kind of the dry academic style. And my editor was haranguing me all the time that, it needs to be a narrative that flows through, that brings the reader through, and don't want to have too many signposts and things like that. And it's a very different style of writing that I have not experienced before.
I would be very fascinated to read whatever you come up with because I've been enjoying what I've been reading so far. I've even tried reading a few of your academic publications on the prairie lands, especially like the Kansas, because I'm really fascinated with that ecology there. But yeah, it is a very different form of writing.
Yes, they're hard going, those sorts of publications. They're hard to read if you're not into the field.
Is there anything that you would like for the audience to know about you that we have not covered?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. Or that I'm always trying to remain British, although I'm over here in America. So I hope that still comes through.
I'm sure it's a little bit daunting whenever you're stuck in middle America.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah. But these days there's more connections than ever used to be. When I was first over in Oklahoma, I mean, just making a phone call was hard.
Oh,
more
yeah.
than any news. But nowadays, with social media and internet, we get it all instantly. The other thing is I'm a huge football fan.
Football fan. Yeah. Who's your team?
Yes, Brighton and Hove Albion.
Oh, nice. We watch a lot of football in this house, but my husband is a big Bayern Munich fan.
Okay.
Yeah. He has to go with the German teams, of course. We live in Germany, so.
Yeah, well, understandably, I'm hoping that Brighton can get into Europe for the first time ever next season. I think they're seventh or eighth in the league right now, so they got to get up to like sixth to get into Europe. That'd be a great achievement.
We keep hoping that we're going to be able to go to the UK to pick up a couple of football matches there too, because we will watch any football anywhere, anytime. It doesn't matter who. We just love the matches.
Yeah, it's just a game you can just sit and watch. I agree, totally.
Now, okay, here's the big question. Have you found a decent British pub anywhere near you where you can get a good pint?
Not in Carbondale. There are some local breweries that we have that have some ale, so it's getting better.
Okay. Because I know how important that is. It's like beer is
fish and chips, steak, kidney pie.
Beer is such a part of the culture here in Germany. It's like life's blood over here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I visited Germany a couple of times and realized that totally. And the huge steins of beer that you serve it in, my gosh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like a liter.
Yes, I know. It's hard going.
It's almost a workout just being able to pick up the steins. It's like you're getting exercise and beer at the same time.
There you go. That's the way to think of it.
I am so thankful that you came on the show with me today. It has been an absolute delight talking to you. And whenever you have something else that you're getting ready to publish, I would love for you to come back.
Okay, that's a deal, definitely. And I look forward to hearing the podcast back when you've got it all edited and posted. And I look forward to seeing your books with forensic evidence in it, especially some botanical evidence.
I am definitely going to be doing some research on that, and it is going to be in there because reading your work and getting to talk to you has inspired me to make sure that I have a more rounded book and storyline.
Well, I'll be happy to talk to you about that if you've got some questions.
Thank you so much, and I will definitely be taking you up on that. So there you have it, my interview with Dr. David J. Gibson. I hope I didn't fangirl too hard during that interview because it was seriously a struggle for me because I was just so in awe of the knowledge that this man holds. I just wanted to keep asking him more and more questions. But of course, we have a time constraint. But please pick up his books if you have any interest at all in forensic botany and how it's used in fiction and actual crime investigations. The work is just, I know I keep saying this, but it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. There's no other word for it. And surprisingly enough, this topic actually comes back up again 2 weeks from now with my interview with Kelly Florence. She has written a series of books with her writing partner, and they're part of the Science of series. There's like 18 books in total in the Science of series, and she and her partner have written 5 of them. And one of the books that they have is called The Science of Serial Killers. And we talk about different kinds of forensic investigation and how authors like Agatha Christie and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle used different kinds of poisons in their work and how Agatha Christie actually knew what she was talking about. So it's kind of interesting how this topic seems to be coming up quite a bit at the moment in my interviews. So be sure to check it out. Now, next week, I have Linnea Denoto, who is going to come on and talk about her debut sci-fi novel, Lithiflora the Chrysalis. That will be March 29th. And then we'll have Kelly Florence on April 5th. The following week, on April 12th, we're going to have Stephanie Levine, who is a cozy mystery writer. And I have been dying to get a cozy mystery writer on here for quite a while, so I'm really looking forward to this. Because personally, I love cozy mysteries. I don't know about you. So I am just really looking forward to talking to her. And at some point, we are going to get Patricia Harmon. She is a midwife and an author who writes the Midwife novel series. She was scheduled to be next week, but because of circumstances beyond our control, we're rescheduling her, and we will bring her on as soon as possible. Keep watching the lineup that I have listed on our website, at burkhartbooks.com. I'll have a link, of course, in the podcast description as always. And you'll find everything for Dr. Gibson's information so that you can find his books in the podcast description as well. Those will be there. They'll be on the website. But check out burkhartbooks.com/podcast, and you'll find a list of all of the upcoming guests and when they're actually live streaming and when these different people are scheduled. So I will keep you all up to date on what's going on. But now it is that wonderful time of day when you get to go forth and be happy.